Her millionaire father vowed never to love again, until she introduced her friend's mother. Elvis Cold, a self-made millionaire haunted by a tragic past, stares into the abyss of his empty life, swearing on his late wife's grave that his heart is forever sealed. But when his elegant daughter, Elegance, brings home her vivacious best friend and unwittingly introduces her widowed mother, Dorothy, a woman with secrets, as deep as the ocean, a spark ignites that threatens to unravel everything he thought he knew about love, betrayal, and redemption. Welcome back, my beautiful family. I wanna says thank you for your love, your attention and support for the growth of our amazing Impert community. I pray may God Almighty should bless you and reward you all and your endeavors. Amen. Please subscribe if you haven't done so, like and comment where you're watching from. Let's begin the amazing story of today. I believe we all are going to be blessed today after this wonderful story. The golden hour sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Thornwood estate, casting long shadows across the marble floors that had witnessed 15 years of carefully constructed solitude. Evie's Thornwood stood in his study, a glass of 20-year-old scotch untouched in his hand, staring at the photograph he kept hidden in the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk. The woman in the picture smiled back at him with eyes that had once held his entire world, eyes that had closed forever on a rain-soaked highway one terrible November night. "I will never love again," he had whispered at her graveside. And for 15 years, he had kept that vow with the same ruthless determination that had built his financial empire. But Evie's Thornwood had never anticipated his daughter. Elegance Thornwood was everything her mother had been: graceful, compassionate, impossibly kind, and everything her father had forgotten how to be. At 23, she moved through the cold halls of the Thornwood estate like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, her laughter a sound so foreign to those walls that the staff would pause in their duties just to hear it. She had inherited her mother's warmth and her father's intelligence, a combination that made her both beloved and formidable in equal measure. Where Evie's had built walls, Elegance built bridges. Where he had chosen isolation, she chose connection. And on this particular October evening, as autumn leaves danced across the manicured grounds of the estate, Elegance was about to build the most important bridge of all, one that would either save her father or destroy what little remained of his carefully guarded heart. "Father." Elegance's voice carried across the study, pulling Evie's from his memories. He quickly returned the photograph to its hiding place and turned to face his daughter, his expression settling into the neutral mask he had perfected over the years. "Yes, Elegance." His voice was measured, professional, the voice of a man who conducted board meetings, not heart-to-heart conversations with his only child. She stood in the doorway, her emerald dress catching the evening light, and for a moment, Evers's breath caught in his throat. She looked so much like her mother that it physically hurt. "I need to talk to you about something important." Evie's gestured to the leather chair across from his desk, his businessman's instincts already cataloguing the slight nervousness in her posture, the way she twisted the silver bracelet on her wrist, a tell she'd had since childhood when she was about to ask for something she thought he might refuse. "I've invited someone to dinner tomorrow night," Elegance began, settling into the chair with a grace that seemed to mock the tension in the room. "Actually, two someones. My friend Sophia and her mother, Dorothy." Evers's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He had successfully avoided social dinners for years, preferring the solitude of his study or the sterile professionalism of business dinners where emotions were checked at the door along with coats and umbrellas. "Elegance, you know I don't." "Please, Father." She leaned forward, her eyes, her mother's eyes, pleading with him. "Sophia has been my best friend since university. Her mother just moved to the city, and she doesn't know anyone here. It's just one dinner. Just a few hours of your time. I have a conference call scheduled." "Reschedule it." Elegance's voice was soft but firm, the steel beneath the silk that reminded Evie's exactly whose daughter she was. "You've rescheduled dinners with me for conference calls 100 times. Surely you can reschedule a conference call for dinner with me just once." The words hit their mark with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Evie's felt the familiar guilt settle in his chest, the guilt that came from knowing his daughter was right, that in his grief and determination to never feel that kind of pain again, he had become a ghost in his own home, a stranger to the one person who should have mattered most. "One dinner," he conceded, his voice gruff. "But don't expect me to be entertaining." Elegance's face lit up with a smile that made the concession worth it, even as dread settled in Evers's stomach. "Thank you, Father. You won't regret this, I promise." But as she left the study, her footsteps light on the marble floors, Evie's couldn't shake the feeling that he would regret it very much indeed. He had no way of knowing that in exactly 24 hours, a woman named Dorothy would walk into his home and systematically dismantle every wall he had spent 15 years building, brick by carefully mortared brick. Dorothy Morrison had learned long ago that first impressions were performances, and she had become an exceptional actress. As she stood before the full-length mirror in her modest apartment, adjusting the navy blue dress that Sophia had insisted was perfect for dinner at the Thornwood estate, she practiced the smile she would wear, polite, warm, but not too warm. Interested, but not too interested. "Mom, you look beautiful," Sophia called from the living room, her voice carrying the same nervous excitement that had characterized her personality since childhood. "We need to leave in 10 minutes if we are going to be on time." Dorothy studied her reflection with a critical eye. At 45, she still turned heads, though she tried not to notice. Her dark hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and her hazel eyes held depths that most people never bothered to explore. She had learned to use her appearance as both shield and sword, beautiful enough to be noticed, but presenting herself in ways that discouraged deeper investigation. She had been married once, a lifetime ago. Sophia's father had been a good man, a kind man, but their marriage had been a comfortable arrangement rather than a great love. When cancer had claimed him 8 years ago, Dorothy had grieved for the friend she lost rather than the lover, and she had spent the years since building a life centered around her daughter and her work as a freelance interior designer. Romance, she had decided, was for other people. People younger, more optimistic, less scarred by the reality that love, even good love, eventually ended in loss. "Ready." Sophia appeared in the doorway, her face glowing with the kind of happiness that came from seeing two of her favorite people about to meet. She had been talking about Elegance Thornwood for 3 years, ever since they'd been assigned as roommates at university, and Dorothy felt like she already knew the young woman who had apparently seen something worth befriending in her socially awkward, brilliant daughter. The drive to the Thornwood estate took them through increasingly affluent neighborhoods until they turned onto a private road lined with ancient oak trees. When the house came into view, Dorothy had to suppress a gasp. Estate was an understatement. It was a monument to wealth and isolation, a sprawling modern masterpiece of glass and stone that seemed to rise from the landscape like something from an architectural magazine. "I know," Sophia said, catching her mother's expression. "It's intimidating. But Elegance is the warmest person you'll ever meet. And her father." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's complicated. Elegance says he wasn't always this way. Her mother died when she was 8, and he just shut down. But Elegance thinks he's ready to start living again, even if he doesn't know it yet." Dorothy felt a flutter of something she didn't want to examine too closely. A widower who had shut himself off from the world, she understood that impulse more than she cared to admit. Elegance met them at the door, and Dorothy immediately understood why Sophia spoke of her with such affection. The young woman radiated warmth and genuine joy, pulling Sophia into an embrace before turning to Dorothy with a smile that could have melted ice. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm so thrilled to finally meet you. Sophia talks about you constantly." Elegance took Dorothy's hands in hers, and Dorothy was struck by the gesture's easy intimacy. "Please, come in. Father is waiting in the sitting room." As they followed Elegance through the stunning entrance hall, Dorothy found herself increasingly nervous. The house was beautiful but cold, decorated with the kind of expensive perfection that suggested a professional designer rather than a lived-in home. There were no family photos on the walls, no personal touches that spoke of the people who lived here. It was more museum than home, more mausoleum than sanctuary. The sitting room was all windows and modern furniture, positioned to take advantage of the spectacular view of the grounds. And standing by those windows, silhouetted against the dying light, was Evie's Thornwood. He turned as they entered, and Dorothy felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. Evie's Thornwood was handsome in the way of men who wore their authority like a second skin, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. But it was the sadness in those eyes that caught Dorothy off guard, the bone-deep weariness of someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. Their eyes met, and for a moment that stretched impossibly long, neither of them moved. Dorothy felt something spark in her chest, recognition, though of what she couldn't say. It was as if she was looking at a mirror, seeing her own carefully constructed defenses reflected back at her in a stranger's face. "Father, this is Sophia's mother, Dorothy Morrison," Elegance was saying, apparently oblivious to the charged silence. "Dorothy, my father, Evie's Thornwood." Evie's moved forward, his hand extended, and Dorothy took it, expecting a perfunctory handshake. Instead, his grip was warm and firm, and he held her hand a moment longer than strictly necessary, his thumb brushing against her knuckles in a gesture that felt almost like a question. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, his voice deep and cultured. "Welcome to my home." "Mr. Thornwood," Dorothy replied, proud that her voice remained steady. "Thank you for having us. Your home is extraordinary. It's just a house." The words came out more bitter than he'd apparently intended, and Dorothy saw Elegance's face fall slightly. Evie seemed to notice as well, because he added, more gently, "But I'm glad you like it." Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 20 but felt intimate with just the 4 of them gathered at one end of the massive table. The food was exquisite, clearly prepared by a professional chef, but Dorothy barely tasted it. She was too focused on the dynamic unfolding around her. Elegance and Sophia chatted away, their easy friendship evident in every exchange, while Evie's remained largely silent, responding when directly addressed but contributing little to the conversation. Dorothy found herself watching him, noting the way his expression softened when he looked at his daughter, the way his shoulders tensed when the conversation veered too close to anything personal. But she also noticed the way he looked at her, quick glances when he thought she wasn't paying attention, his gaze lingering on her face as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Dorothy is an interior designer," Sophia was saying, pride evident in her voice. "She's done work for some amazing clients in Chicago." "Is that so?" Evers's attention fixed on Dorothy with an intensity that made her skin warm. "What brought you to the city?" "A fresh start," Dorothy replied honestly. "Sophia graduated and moved here, and I realized there was nothing keeping me in Chicago anymore. Sometimes you need to leave a place to stop being haunted by it." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Evers's expression shifted, something flickering in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "I find that ghosts follow you wherever you go," he said quietly. "Geography rarely solves that particular problem." "Perhaps," Dorothy met his gaze steadily, "but sometimes a change of scenery makes it easier to distinguish between ghosts and memories. Ghosts haunt you. Memories are just the past." "That's very philosophical for a first dinner," Evie said, but there was a hint of something in his voice, amusement, maybe, or challenge. "My mother has always been philosophical," Sophia interjected, clearly pleased that her mother and Elegance's father were actually engaging with each other. "She says design is just applied philosophy, creating spaces that reflect how people want to live, not how they think they should live." "How does someone usually want to live versus how they think they should?" Elegance asked, genuinely curious. Dorothy considered the question, acutely aware of Evers's attention. "Most people design their homes for show, to impress guests, to project success, to maintain an image. But what they really want, deep down, is comfort. Safety. A space that feels like home rather than a showroom." She didn't look at Evie's as she spoke, but she felt his reaction, a slight stiffening, as if her words had hit too close to home. Because that's exactly what this house was. A beautiful, expensive showroom where life had stopped 15 years ago. "That must be why your apartment always feels so cozy," Elegance said to Sophia. "Your mom designed it, right?" "She did," Sophia confirmed. "It's nothing fancy, but it feels like home. Which is more than I can say for the dorms we lived in." The conversation drifted to college memories, and Dorothy found herself relaxing slightly, laughing at the stories of midnight study sessions and campus adventures. Even Evie seemed to unbend a little, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth as Elegance recounted a particularly disastrous attempt at cooking in their dorm room that had resulted in a visit from campus security. But throughout the evening, Dorothy remained hyper-aware of Evers's presence, the way he held his wine glass, the timbre of his voice, the rare moments when their eyes met across the table and held just a beat too long. After dinner, Elegance suggested they move to the terrace for dessert and coffee. The autumn evening was cool but not cold, and the terrace offered a spectacular view of the grounds, now illuminated by carefully placed landscape lighting that made the gardens glow. "This is incredible," Dorothy breathed, momentarily forgetting her careful composure as she took in the view. "My wife designed these gardens," Evie said quietly, coming to stand beside her at the terrace railing. She had a gift for making things grow. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife, and Dorothy felt the weight of that trust, that he would share even this small piece of his grief with a stranger. "She had an artist's eye," Dorothy replied, studying the carefully orchestrated landscape. "The way the lighting highlights the Japanese maples, the way the paths curve to create mystery. This was designed by someone who understood that a garden should feel like a journey." Evie's turned to look at her fully, surprise evident in his expression. That's exactly what she used to say. That a garden should tell a story, should invite exploration. "The best designs always do," Dorothy said softly. "They create spaces where life can happen, where memories can be made." "Or where memories can be preserved," Evie said, his voice rough with emotion. "I haven't changed anything in these gardens since she died. The landscaping company follows her original plan exactly." Dorothy heard the confession beneath the words, that he had turned these beautiful gardens into a shrine, another part of his life frozen in time. She chose her next words carefully. "Preservation is important. But gardens are living things. They grow, they change, they need to evolve. That's what makes them beautiful. Your wife created something meant to live, not to be embalmed." Evers's jaw tightened, and Dorothy worried she'd overstepped. But when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than angry. "You don't mince words, do you, Mrs. Morrison? Life's too short for polite lies, Mr. Thornwood. And please, call me Dorothy." "Then you must call me Evie's." He paused, then added, "Though I warn you, most people who know me would say you're wrong about life being short. These past 15 years have felt interminable." "Then perhaps," Dorothy said gently, "you've been spending them in the wrong way." Before Evie's could respond, Elegance and Sophia joined them, and the moment passed. But Dorothy felt it lingering between them, a connection formed, however tentative, however unwelcome. The evening wound down with more coffee and conversation, but the easy flow from earlier had shifted into something more charged, more aware. When it was finally time to leave, Dorothy found herself reluctant, which surprised and unsettled her in equal measure. "Thank you for a lovely evening," she told Elegance as they stood in the entrance hall. "Your home is beautiful." "Thank you for coming," Elegance replied, and Dorothy could see the hope shining in the young woman's eyes. She had orchestrated this meeting with a purpose, and Dorothy had the unsettling feeling that she and Evie's had performed exactly as Elegance had hoped. Evie's walked them to the door, the perfect host despite his earlier reluctance. When he shook Dorothy's hand in farewell, his grip lingered again, his thumb tracing a small circle on her palm that sent electricity shooting up her arm. "I hope you'll come again," he said, and there was something in his voice, a question, maybe, or a plea he didn't quite know how to voice. "I'd like that," Dorothy heard herself say, and meant it. In the car on the way home, Sophia was practically vibrating with excitement. "He liked you. Mom, did you see the way he looked at you? I don't think I've ever heard Mr. Thornwood talk that much to anyone outside a business meeting." "We were just being polite, sweetheart," Dorothy said, but her words felt hollow even to her own ears. "You were connecting," Sophia corrected. "There's a difference. And Elegance is going to be so happy. She's been worried about her father for years." Dorothy stared out the window at the passing streetlights, her mind replaying the evening, the weight of Evers's gaze, the rawness in his voice when he spoke of his wife, the way something had shifted in the air between them when they stood on that terrace. She had come to the city for a fresh start, to leave behind the comfortable loneliness she had built around herself in Chicago. She had not come looking for romance, and certainly not with a grieving widower who wore his pain like armor. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, Dorothy couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had happened. That in meeting Evie's Thornwood, in seeing her own careful defenses reflected back at her in his storm grey eyes, she had stepped onto a path she couldn't yet see but could no longer avoid. In his study across town, Evie stood at the window, whiskey glass in hand, staring out at the gardens his wife had designed. For the first time in 15 years, he was looking at them differently, not as a shrine to what he'd lost, but as living things that had been frozen in time. He thought of Dorothy Morrison, with her direct gaze and her gentle truths that cut deeper than accusations. He thought of how she had looked standing on his terrace, the autumn wind lifting her hair, her eyes reflecting the garden lights. He thought of the way his heart had stuttered when she smiled, really smiled, at something Elegance had said. And for the first time since he had stood at his wife's grave and sworn never to love again, Evie's Thornwood wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. 3 weeks after that first dinner, Dorothy found herself standing in the entrance hall of the Thornwood estate once again. But this time she was alone, and she was here for business, not pleasure. Elegance had called 2 days prior with an unexpected proposal. "Dorothy, I have a crazy idea, and I want you to hear me out before you say no." Dorothy had learned that when Elegance said she had a crazy idea, it usually meant something that was equal parts brilliant and potentially dangerous to one's peace of mind. "I'm listening. I want to hire you to redesign the estate." "Well, not me exactly. Father would be hiring you. But it was my idea, and I've finally convinced him that the house needs updating." Dorothy's heart had done a complicated thing in her chest, equal parts thrill at the professional opportunity and alarm at what it would mean. "Elegance, I don't think." "He's agreed to at least hear your ideas," Elegance interrupted. "That's huge, Dorothy. He hasn't changed anything in this house since Mom died. The fact that he's even willing to consider it means something is shifting. And I think you're exactly what the house needs." Dorothy had heard the careful correction, the way Elegance had changed he to the house, and she'd known that the young woman was matchmaking as much as she was trying to help her father. But the professional opportunity was too good to pass up. The Thornwood estate was exactly the kind of project that could establish her reputation in the city. So here she was, her tablet loaded with preliminary ideas, her heart beating too fast, waiting to see Evie's Thornwood again. When he appeared at the top of the grand staircase, descending with the easy grace of someone who owned everything he surveyed, Dorothy felt that same electric awareness she'd experienced at dinner. He was wearing a charcoal suit that must have been custom-tailored, and his silver-threaded hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. "Dorothy," he said, and the sound of her name in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. "Thank you for coming." "Evie's." She extended her hand, professional and composed, even as her pulse raced. "Elegance said you were interested in discussing some updates to the house." His handshake was firm, warm, and over too quickly. "My daughter has many ideas about what I need," he said dryly. "She thinks the house is too cold, too impersonal. She may be right." "May I ask what changed your mind? About considering renovations, I mean." Dorothy kept her voice carefully neutral, her designer's eye already cataloguing the space, the cold marble, the lack of color, the carefully curated emptiness. Evie's was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You did, actually. What you said about gardens being living things that need to evolve. It made me realize that I've been treating this entire house like a museum. It's not a home anymore. Maybe it never really was, not after." He stopped, his jaw tightening. "After your wife passed," Dorothy finished gently. "Evie's, before we go any further, I need to be honest with you. Redesigning a home, especially one with this much emotional weight, isn't just about furniture and paint colors. It's about examining how you want to live now, not how you lived then. It can be uncomfortable." "I've been uncomfortable for 15 years, Evie's replied, meeting her eyes. "Perhaps it's time to be uncomfortable in a different way." They spent the next 3 hours touring the estate, and with each room, Dorothy felt her heart break a little more for the man walking beside her. Every space was frozen in time. The living room arranged exactly as it must have been for some long-ago gathering, the dining room set as if guests might arrive at any moment, even the master bedroom that Evie's admitted he no longer slept in. "I use one of the guest rooms," he confessed as they stood in the doorway of the master suite. "I couldn't bring myself to change anything in here, but I also couldn't stand to sleep surrounded by all of this." Dorothy understood. The room was beautiful but sterile, more hotel than home, with no personal touches save for a single photograph on the nightstand. A wedding photo, she assumed, though she didn't move close enough to examine it. "Where do you actually spend your time?" she asked. "Not where you think you should spend it, or where you used to spend it. Where do you naturally gravitate?" Evie's considered the question, then led her down a hallway she hadn't been in before, to a smaller room at the back of the house. It was his study, but not the formal one he'd been in during their first visit. This was clearly his real sanctuary. Books lined the walls, a worn leather chair sat by the window overlooking the gardens, and papers were scattered across a desk that looked actually used rather than merely decorative. "Here," he admitted. "This is the only room that feels like mine." Dorothy walked slowly around the space, taking it in. There was life here, a half-empty coffee cup, a blanket draped over the chair, reading glasses on the desk. This was where Evie's Thornwood actually lived, crammed into one small room while the rest of his massive house stood empty. "What if," she said slowly, the idea forming as she spoke, "we made the whole house feel like this? Not identical, obviously, but with this same sense of being lived in, being real. What if we created spaces that invited you to be comfortable rather than perfect?" Evie stared at her, and she could see the war in his eyes, the part of him that desperately wanted what she was offering, and the part that was terrified of it. That would require letting go of how things were. "Yes," Dorothy agreed. "It would. I won't lie to you, Evie's. If you hire me, I'm going to push you to make changes that will feel wrong at first. I'm going to ask you to box up things that have been in place for years. I'm going to challenge but we've always done it this way. And it's going to be hard. Why are you trying to talk me out of hiring you?" He moved closer, studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because I don't take on projects that are going to fail, and this will fail if you're not ready to commit to the process. I'm not interested in rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, Evie's. If we do this, we do it right, which means fundamentally rethinking how you live in this space." He was quiet for a long moment, and Dorothy thought she'd pushed too hard, been too honest. Then he smiled, a real smile that transformed his face, erasing years of careful control. "I think that's exactly why elegance insisted it had to be you. You're not afraid of me." "Should I be?" Dorothy challenged. "Most people are," Evie's admitted. "Most people see the money, the power, the reputation, and they tell me what they think I want to hear. You've done nothing but tell me uncomfortable truths since the moment we met. Would you prefer I lie?" "God, no." He laughed, and the sound was rusty, as if he didn't do it often. "I've had enough lies, enough people managing me, enough careful politeness to last several lifetimes. Your honesty is refreshing. Terrifying, but refreshing." Dorothy felt warmth bloom in her chest, dangerous and unwelcome. "Then we have a deal. You'll let me reimagine this house, even if the process is uncomfortable." "On one condition," Evie said, and Dorothy's heart skipped. "We do this together. I don't just want you to design something and implement it while I'm at the office. I want to be part of the process. If I'm going to tear down the walls I've been hiding behind, I need to be present for it." It was the worst possible condition, the one thing Dorothy should refuse. Working closely with Evie's Thornwood for weeks or months, spending hours together discussing not just design but life, meaning, how he wanted to live, it was a recipe for disaster. For feeling things she had no business feeling. "Agreed," she heard herself say. "When do we start?" They started the very next day, and Dorothy quickly discovered that redesigning the Thornwood estate was unlike any project she'd ever undertaken. Evie's kept his word about being present, often working from home so he could consult with her, and their design sessions quickly became something more, conversations that ranged from architecture to philosophy to their respective pasts. Dorothy learned that Evie's had met his wife, Catherine, in college, that they'd been friends first, then lovers, then partners in every sense of the word. Catherine had been his opposite in many ways, warm where he was reserved, social where he was solitary, optimistic where he tended toward pragmatism. She had softened his edges, he said, made him better than he was alone. The problem, Evie's admitted one afternoon as they sat in what was soon to be a reimagined living room, fabric samples spread between them, is that I don't know who I am without her. I was 20 when we met, 45 when she died. My entire adult life was spent being half of a whole. Now I'm just half. Dorothy understood that feeling more than she cared to admit. That's not uncommon, she said gently. When we define ourselves through relationships, through being someone's husband or wife, someone's parent, we forget to maintain our own identity. And when that relationship ends, whether through death or divorce, we feel lost because we don't know who we are independently. Is that what happened to you? With your husband? Evie's asked. It was the first time he directly asked about her past, though she'd sensed his curiosity. Dorothy considered how much to share. Partially. My marriage was different from yours, though. Michael and I cared for each other, but we were never passionate. We were friends who got married because it seemed like the right next step. We had Sophia, we built a life, and it was good. But when he got sick, when I lost him, I grieved for my friend and for the father of my child, not for the great love of my life. Which made me feel guilty, actually, like I should have loved him more, should have felt more devastated. But you can't force feelings, Evie said quietly. Believe me, I've tried. Their eyes met, and Dorothy felt that now familiar pull between them, the sense of recognition, of seeing someone who understood. What have you tried to force? She asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Evie's looked away, focusing on the fabric samples, but his voice was strained when he answered. I've tried to force myself to be content with this half-life I've been living. I've tried to force myself not to be angry with Catherine for leaving me, which is irrational because she didn't choose to die. I've tried to force myself not to feel guilty every time I laugh or enjoy something, as if experiencing joy is a betrayal of her memory. He paused. And lately, I've been trying to force myself not to feel things that would definitely be a betrayal. Dorothy's heart hammered against her ribs. What kind of things? But before Evie's could answer, Elegance's voice echoed through the house. Father. Dorothy. Where are you? The moment shattered, and Dorothy wasn't sure if she was relieved or disappointed. Evie stood quickly, his expression shuddering back into neutral professionalism. In here, he called. Elegance appeared in the doorway, her face bright with excitement. I have news. Sophia and I have been invited to speak at a design conference in London, a whole panel on sustainable urban development. It's a huge opportunity, but it means we'll be gone for 2 weeks. She looked between them, reading something in their expressions that made her smile widen. But I'm sure you two will manage without us. 2 weeks. Dorothy echoed, her mind already calculating what it would mean. 2 weeks of working closely with Evie's without the buffer of their daughter's presence. 2 weeks of navigating whatever this thing between them was becoming. We leave in 3 days, Sophia confirmed, appearing behind Elegance. I know the timing isn't ideal with the renovation, but... The timing is fine, Evie's interrupted. This is an incredible opportunity. You should absolutely go. After the young women left, chattering excitedly about the conference, Dorothy and Evie stood in awkward silence. Finally, Evie spoke. Should we continue? We were discussing the fabric for the sofa. Actually, Dorothy said, needing distance, needing to process what had almost been said before they were interrupted. I should go. I have another client meeting this afternoon, and I need to prep. It was a lie, and from the look in Evers's eyes, he knew it. But he didn't call her on it, just nodded. Of course. Same time tomorrow. Same time tomorrow, Dorothy confirmed, already heading for the door. She made it to her car before the shaking started, her hands trembling so badly she had to take 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. What was she doing? She was supposed to be redesigning a house, not developing feelings for her client. She was supposed to be building a professional reputation, not engaging in emotionally charged conversations about grief and guilt and things that felt like betrayals. But as she drove home, Dorothy couldn't stop thinking about Evers's words. And lately, I've been trying to force myself not to feel things that would definitely be a betrayal. She knew exactly what kind of things he meant, because she was trying to force herself not to feel them too. The next 2 weeks tested every professional boundary Dorothy had ever set for herself. With Elegance and Sophia in London, she and Evie's fell into a rhythm that felt dangerously intimate. Mornings spent walking through the house discussing plans, afternoons making decisions about paint colors and furniture, evenings that somehow always ended with them sitting in his study, conversations ranging far beyond the renovation. Dorothy learned that Evie's was a voracious reader, that his favorite author was Gabriel Garcia Marquez, that he'd once harbored dreams of being an architect before his father pushed him into finance.